Taylor, you did a very nice job with your portrait series, not only with your images, but also with the makeup that you used and applied to your sisters. So we'll just kind of skip through here quick. I got one of them out of order. So including the makeup, I think is certainly fine, although I don't think that it was needed. Since this series is really about you applying makeup to your sisters and then taking photographs of them, it's okay. If you weren't the makeup artist, then I would say it doesn't belong at all. And even as such, I think that it's probably the least interesting of them. Certainly you could have done a series just on the makeup as well, and that would have been great. So the reason I'd say probably take it out, though, is here we have 5 images of your sister's portraits and then just one of the makeup, so that we don't have a good balance. Anytime you have one of something in a series, then it gives it more importance over the other images, and obviously that's not the case. I mean, this was part of the overall series, of course, but it wasn't really the primary focus. Going through, I think you have a nice mix. So if you're going to have a mix of black and white, you definitely want to have a balance there, and I think that you've done that well enough with 2 out of the 5. So that's good. One thing that I would suggest for black and white, though, is it really almost begs for high contrast. So here with the Bella picture, I think we're pretty high contrast here. We have really pretty bright skin tones, and we have really pretty dark shadow detail here in the hair, and so I think that we've done a pretty good job there in terms of high contrast. This one here is a little bit flat in comparison, and the reason is because just because of the difference in the way that the window is positioned here in the background. So here you don't really see the window. I mean, you can see a little bit of a fringe, but because she really takes up the frame, your camera was metering a little different than it was for this particular image. And so one of the things that you might do, and the easiest one is probably the levels, just kind of move these sliders over. You bring the dark point slider just to where the histogram begins, and we move that highlight slider over a little bit. Now you see we're already peaking here, which is telling us that we've lost detail in the highlights, but that's just really the background here. And because this is a portrait about your sister, then that's not really that important, so we kind of bring that up. And maybe somewhere in there. Now the thing that concerns me a little bit is I'm introducing some blown highlights right here in this part of her forehead, and so this is where I would use a layer mask, and I would use the brush tool, and I would paint with black with a relatively low opacity brush. Now you can see I've got some funky brush there, so we need to go back to one of the defaults. And one of the ways that you would want to do this is probably the soft round. The reason that I would use a soft brush is to really feather it a little bit more. We're going to zoom out a little bit and just kind of click and drag over that a little bit. And you can see how now we've got nicely brightened image overall, but we aren't overblowing this part of the skin tone, which is important. Color, you really can't push the contrast quite as much, because then you start to introduce some funny colors to it. For this image, it looks like you've got a little bit of a blue color cast, and given that you have that here as well, not that one, just these 2 indoors, I wasn't completely clear if that was just a matter of you're using window light on a gray day and it's going to be inherently blue, or if that was a filtered effect. If you were not giving consideration to the coloring, one of the things you might do is a curves adjustment layer. So I showed different techniques for doing color correction in other videos. This time I'm going to show you how to remove just a single color. So if you go, instead of the RGB, which is all of the colors, just go to the blue. The thing to understand here is blue and yellow are opposites on the color wheel. So if we remove a little bit of blue, that means we're adding a little bit of yellow. And if you move this slider here to the left, where you can see we're adding more and more blue. And of course that's not what we want. So then the key here is to grab this point here and bring it down a little bit. And Once you have that little point selected, the easiest thing is actually just to use the keyboard, the arrows, and you can just bring it down one at a time. And I think we're getting close. I think that now what I'm seeing is perhaps a little bit of green, and so you can go back to these different color channels and just kind of tweak it until it looks like you expect or want it to look, really. And maybe we'll increase the reds a little bit this time. And so again, you can use the slider if you want, or you can use the arrows and you can just move it over a little bit and just kind of warm it up. So that's one way you can do it. You can see the difference there, and I think that's still not quite perfect, but we're getting close. The other thing you can do is on your actual image layer, you can do a filter, and you can do camera raw filter. And once that pops up, if you use this white balance tool, click on something that ought to be neutral. So it looks like this is perhaps a black band on her shirt, and you can see that actually does a pretty good job. One of the other caveats here is that we obviously have a little bit different lighting here on the bottom part of the image as we do on the top. This is because she's getting more of this outdoor light on her face than she is on her arm. And perhaps it's, I don't know, depending on the color of a wall or something like that too, it might be bringing in some warmth here. If we want to do just part of an image, we can do the graduated filter. And we want to make sure all of these things are zeroed out. Go ahead and change these all to 0. And so the one we want to do is just introduce a little bit more yellow. And if we kind of click and drag here, anything that's above the green is applying it fully. Anything that's below is not at all. And this way we get a nice feathered approach. And so once we get that in there, we can kind of fine tune and tweak. So maybe somewhere in here, maybe a little bit of red tones. And we click OK to commit to that. And here you can see just the before and the after. It makes it look a little bit more natural. Finally, one thing that you might consider is brightening up the eyes. So any portrait eyes are going to be really key. One of the things you might do is select the lasso tool. Just kind of click and drag around. In fact, I might actually do her whole face. And then I'm going to copy this part to a new layer. And so the easiest way is just Command J or Control J on a keyboard. And then change the blending mode to screen. And you can see how it brightens everything up, but it almost looks a little too washed out. I actually like the detail here in her eyes very well. I think the skin tone's a little too washed out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a layer mask. And if I hold on the Alt or Option key when I click on that, it makes it black, so it hides everything. And so now I'm going to brush with white and a small brush, and I'm going to actually make my opacity and flow even a little lower, because we want to be pretty subtle with this, otherwise it will just not look good. So I'm going to brush over her eyes just a little bit, and that really helps to make them pop. And so you can see just that, and that's probably a little too far. We'll adjust that after the fact. Now I'm going to do some of the shadow area in her face a little bit. Maybe one like that. You definitely want to make sure that the makeup is included in there, because with the portrait like this, the makeup is obviously an important part of it. So then what we can do is we can dial down the opacity until we get it just looking as we want it to. And so somewhere in there is, I think, pretty good. And so just those kind of subtle changes can add a little bit of extra polish to your portraits. So your outdoor portrait, I think, is probably the best lighting overall. So your window portraits, I think, actually are pretty well lit, but it depends on exactly where your models were standing in terms of the window. So here it's a little bit behind her, so the lighting isn't quite as good. Here she's a little bit back in it, so we get a little bit better lighting, and I guess this is kind of in between. Outdoor portrait, beautiful lighting overall. Clearly it was a gray day, and that's ideal for this kind of setup. Here it looks like she's getting really good light from this window, even though she's got the other window behind her. Again, really smooth skin tones. Her face is lit very well. You could brighten up her irises just a little bit if you wanted to, but I think keeping them a little dark is fine too. Overall, really nice job with your series. A little bit of tweaking in post-processing can even take them to the next level, but I think that your attention to detail for the entire series was very good. Let me know if you have any questions.